We all know the face, the round, expressive face of a comedic genius. We know the sounds, the frantic woo-woo-woos, the gleeful nuke-nuke-nukes, the exasperated soitenlees. For generations, Jerome Lester Horwitz, better known to the world as Curly Howard, was more than just a comedian. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of childlike joy and anarchic energy who became the heart and soul of the Three Stooges. He was the most popular, the most recognizable, the one who could make millions of people laugh with nothing more than a spin on the floor or a bark like a dog. He was simply a master of his craft, but that's the man on the screen. For decades, the story of what happened off-screen has been a profound Hollywood tragedy. What really happened to the world's most beloved stooge? We were told it was a health issue, a sad but straightforward decline. But the full story, pieced together from biographies, family accounts, and Mo Howard's own heartbreaking late-life reflections, is far darker and more complex than many fans realize. The truth is a story of a man failed by the very system that made him a star, a man who battled crippling physical ailments and what we would now call a mental health crisis in silence. It's the story of a family left with a legacy of pain and regret they carried for the rest of their lives. This is the story of what truly happened to Curly Howard, and it will change everything you thought you knew about the man who made the world laugh while his own was falling apart. We all know this face of Curly Howard, the vibrant, balletic, comedic genius who could make millions laugh with a simple woo-woo-woo. But what if I told you that behind that laughter was a story of immense pain? A story whose tragic details have been known to his family for decades, but are still shocking. To fans today, what if I told you that this was the same man, just a few short, brutal years later? The journey from one to the other is one of Hollywood's most profound tragedies. To understand the tragedy, you first have to understand the magic. Jerome Lester Horwitz was born on October 22, 1903, in Brooklyn, New York, the youngest of 5 brothers in a working-class Jewish family of Lithuanian descent. He was known as Babe to his family, a nickname that perfectly suited his shy, quiet, and introverted nature off stage, a personality that was the total opposite of the explosive persona he would later adopt. His interest in show business was sparked by watching his older brothers, Mo and Shemp, who were already carving out a career in vaudeville as part of a rough-and-tumble act called Ted Healy and His Stooges. In 1932, Shemp decided to leave the act for a solo career, creating an unexpected opening. Mo immediately suggested his kid brother, Babe. There was just one problem. Ted Healy looked at the young man, who had a thick, wavy mane of auburn hair and a dapper mustache, and didn't see a stooge. Thinking fast, Babe left the room, shaved his head and mustache, and came back a few minutes later. The transformation was so shocking, so funny, that he was hired on the spot. And in that moment, Jerome Babe Horwitz was gone, and Curly was born. He had no formal training as an actor, but he had something far more valuable: raw, unfiltered comedic instinct. He joined Mo and the third stooge, Larry Fine, and when the trio broke from Ted Healy to sign with Columbia Pictures in 1934, the classic Three Stooges lineup was born. It didn't take long for everyone to realize who the breakout star was. Curly was just different. While Mo was the aggressive leader and Larry was the bemused middleman, Curly was a creature of pure ED. He was a master of physical comedy, a brilliant improviser, and a fountain of bizarre, unforgettable sounds. The nuke-nuke-nuke laugh, the woo-woo-woo alarm, the frustrated barks, these were all his unique creations, often improvised on the spot. Mo later recalled that if Curly ever forgot a line, instead of freezing, he'd drop to the floor and spin like a top until the line came back to him, a move that often got a bigger laugh than the script ever could. His physicality was breathtaking. He could absorb cartoonish violence, eye pokes, slaps, pies to the face, and react with an almost balletic grace. He even developed an exaggerated limping walk to mask a real limp he'd had since a childhood. Firearm accident, turning a private insecurity into a public comedy signature. From 1934 to the early 1940s, the Stooges, powered by Curly's unstoppable energy, were the kings of the comedy short. They made over 90 films for Columbia during this period, classics like Punch Drunks, A Plumbing We Will Go, and Disorder in the Court. In these films, Curly wasn't just a part of the team. He was the engine. He was the one tangled in plumbing, fighting with inanimate objects and reacting to everything with a wild mix of terror and delight. He was the character audiences connected with most, a giant man-child who, no matter what abuse he took, remained eternally optimistic and lovable. But behind the laughter, a deep-seated insecurity was festering. The very thing that made him famous, his shaved head, was a source of deep personal shame. He felt it made him unattractive to women, and this insecurity fueled a lifelong, desperate search for love. He was an introvert who craved connection, but was terrified of rejection. This internal conflict would lead him down a path of reckless behavior with devastating consequences. As his fame grew, so did the pressure. The studio, knowing he was their most valuable asset, demanded more and more, and the man known as Babe began to disappear, consumed by the persona of Curly and the relentless machine of Hollywood. The life of a stooge was physically punishing. The slapstick, which looked so hilarious on screen, was grueling work. Howard later admitted many of the slaps and falls were just as real as they looked, a daily barrage of physical abuse that took its toll. By 1944, the cracks in Curly's joyful facade began to show. Keen-eyed fans could spot it. In shorts like Idle Rumors and Booby Dupes, the change is subtle but undeniable. His movements, once so energetic, were becoming slower. His high-pitched, comedic voice was deepening into a strained, hoarse croak. He struggled with his lines, often looking off-camera for cues from his brother Moe. This decline was a sign of a storm raging inside his body. In early 1945, a deeply concerned Moe took his brother for a medical exam. The results were shocking. Curly was diagnosed with severe hypertension, a retinal hemorrhage, and obesity. In simple terms, his blood pressure was so dangerously high that blood vessels in his eyes were bursting. The doctors insisted he take a long break from their punishing film schedule to rest, but they were under contract to Columbia Pictures, a studio run by the notoriously callous Harry Cohn. Cohn saw the Stooges, and especially Curly, as a cash cow. He flatly refused to let them stop filming, forcing a clearly sick man to keep working. This decision wasn't just cruel, it was a potential death sentence. The studio tried to hide his deteriorating condition. Directors reused old footage of a healthier Curly, and Moe and Larry took on more of the comedic load, trying to give Curly a break within scenes. But it was a losing battle. The vibrant energy that was the cornerstone of their comedy was visibly fading. His off-screen life was just as turbulent. The shy, insecure man behind the comedy sought solace in a destructive lifestyle. He drank heavily and spent lavishly on nightlife, food, and companionship, trying to fill a void that fame only made wider. His generosity was legendary, but it also made him a target. He was desperate to settle down, to find the love and stability he saw in his brother Moe's life. This desperation led him into a series of disastrous relationships. The most catastrophic was his marriage to Marion Buxbaum in October 1945. After a courtship of only 2 weeks, Curly married her. The union was a nightmare from the start. It quickly became clear she was mainly interested in his money, and the marriage fell apart into bitter arguments and public accusations. They separated after just 3 months, and their divorce finalized. About 9 months after they married was a humiliating spectacle played out in the tabloids. The emotional trauma of the divorce, combined with the relentless pressure from the studio and his escalating health problems, created a perfect storm. Shortly after the separation, in early 1946, Curly suffered his first major stroke. He was only 42 years old. Incredibly, after only a brief rest, the studio pushed him back to work. The films he made after this are painful to watch. He looks tired and worn, and his performances are sluggish, a shadow of the comedic giant he once was. The man who had brought so much joy to the world was now a tragic figure, a victim of his own fame, his own body, and a studio that valued profit over a human life. The worst was yet to come. May 6, 1946. It was the final day of filming for the 97th Three Stooges short, a film ironically titled Half-Wit's Holiday. The script was a remake of an earlier, more successful film and was set to end with one of their signature epic pie fights. The set was prepped, the cast was ready, and a massive canvas was laid down to contain the whipped cream chaos. But throughout the shoot, it was painfully obvious how much Curly was struggling. He had to be positioned next to Moe in every scene, with his older brother guiding him through his lines and actions. His delivery was slow, his timing was off. He looked frail and exhausted. Director Jules White and the crew did their best to work around him, but everyone knew something was terribly wrong. Between takes, Curly went to sit in Director Jules White's chair to rest, a common practice for him, the assistant. Director called for the Stooges to take their places for the final scene. "Roll 'em!" Moe and Larry stepped onto the set, ready for the pie-throwing mayhem. But Curly didn't appear. A sense of unease settled over the set. Moe, using the affectionate nickname only family used, called out, "Come on, babe!" When there was still no response, Moe went to find him. He found his younger brother sitting silently in the director's chair. His head was slumped to his chest, and tears were streaming down his face. Moe put a hand on his shoulder. "Babe, what is it?" Curly tried to lift his head. He tried to speak, but he couldn't. His mouth was distorted, and the only sound he could make was a heartbreaking, helpless cry. Moe knew instantly. This was it. The devastating, massive stroke they had all feared had finally happened. There was no big announcement. Moe quietly told Jules White, who had to make a split-second decision. With a star incapacitated and a crew on the clock, the show had to go on. White quickly reworked the entire pie fight, dividing Curly's planned actions between Moe and Larry. To the rest of the cast, Curly had just vanished. While Moe and Larry mechanically went through the motions of throwing pies, their minds elsewhere, Curly was being rushed to the motion picture and television country house and hospital. As soon as the director yelled, "Cut!" for the final time, Moe raced to the hospital to be by his brother's side. On that soundstage, amidst the wreckage of a fake pie fight, something real and irreplaceable had been shattered. Curly Howard's 14-year career as a stooge was over. The laughter machine, as one biographer put it, was officially silent. The man who had spun and woo-wooed his way into the hearts of millions was now fighting for his life, his comedic voice silenced forever. It was the end of an era and the beginning of a long, tragic final chapter. The stroke of May 1946 ended Curly's career, but it was only the beginning of his long, painful decline. The public was largely kept in the dark. Columbia Pictures quietly replaced him, bringing back his older brother Shemp with the initial understanding it would only be temporary until Curly was well enough to return. But everyone who saw him knew a return was impossible. He spent weeks in the hospital before, returning home, partially paralyzed and facing a brutal new reality. The next few years were a heartbreaking cycle of small improvements followed by devastating setbacks. In a rare moment of happiness, he met a woman named Valerie Newman, who, unlike his previous wife, seemed to genuinely care for him. Friends called her the only decent thing to happen to him. They married on July 31, 1947, and in 1948 she gave birth to a daughter, Janie. For a brief moment, Curly had a taste of the normal, stable family life he'd always craved. He even made one final, poignant appearance on screen. During a visit to the set of the 1947 Stooge short Hold That Lion, he was written into a brief cameo. With a full head of hair, he appears as a sleeping train passenger who lets out his trademark bark. It is the only film in history to feature all three Howard brothers, Moe, Shemp, and Curly, on screen at the same time. An intended second cameo was reportedly considered for a later film, Malice in the Palace, and a promotional photo of him in costume even exists, but his illness was too severe for him to participate. In late 1948, he suffered another massive stroke that left him confined to a wheelchair. His health deteriorated rapidly. His diet was heavily restricted to manage his health, and his ability to communicate vanished, leaving him trapped inside his own failing body. Friends and family described agonizing scenes where the once boisterous comedian would cry in frustration, unable to articulate even the simplest desire. By the end, he could only communicate with Moe by squeezing his hand or blinking his eyes. It's in this dark period that the family's secret struggles and Moe's haunting late-life regret come into focus. For decades, Moe was the stoic leader, the protector of the Stooges' legacy. But in his final years, he began to break his silence, revealing the immense guilt he carried over his brother's fate. Moe confessed that he and everyone else had seen the warning signs for years, the slurred speech, the forgotten lines, the physical decline, but they had kept the profitable comedy machine running. He expressed profound guilt for not fighting harder against the studio and for not forcing Curly to rest when doctors demanded it. In Moe's eyes, the stroke on set wasn't just a medical event. It was the spiritual death of his brother. The vibrant, joyful man was gone in an instant. As Curly's condition worsened, one hospital suggested he be moved to a mental institution, claiming his deterioration was an inconvenience. Moe was horrified and adamantly refused, seeing it as the ultimate betrayal. He chose instead to pay for private care, moving Curly from one sanitarium to another, desperately trying to preserve his brother's dignity. The financial strain was immense. Despite being a huge star, Curly's reckless spending and exploitation by others had left him in a poor financial state. Moe had to step in, managing his brother's finances and paying his medical bills. It was an act of brotherly love, but also a heavy burden. There were other heartbreaking stories. Curly's love for dogs became one of his few solaces. He rescued stray animals, perhaps finding in them the unconditional love he so rarely received from people. There's a particularly sad story of Moe bringing Curly's beloved collie, Lady, to the hospital for a visit. The dog, perhaps sensing the profound change in its master, refused to enter the room, staying whimpering in the doorway. On January 7, 1952, Moe got a call on the Columbia set to help move Curly for what would be the last time. On January 18, 1952, Jerome Curly Howard died at the Baldy View Sanitarium in San Gabriel, California. He was only 48 years old. His passing was noted, but without the fanfare his contribution to comedy deserved. For his family, especially Moe, the tragedy was a wound that would never fully heal. It wasn't a mystery to them. It was a story of neglect, pressure, and a gentle soul who was chewed up and spit out by the industry he helped build. The story of Curly Howard is a profound tragedy, one of immense joy shadowed by immense pain. For over a decade, he was arguably the most brilliant physical comedian in the world. He gave everything he had to make people laugh, and in doing so, he created a legacy of happiness that is immortal. His comedic genius, his raw energy, and his childlike innocence have transcended generations. Children today still discover the Three Stooges, and they still laugh the hardest at Curly. That magic can never be diminished, but understanding his full story forces us to look beyond the laughter. The truth about his hidden health battles, his struggles in an era that had no language for mental health, and the immense pressure placed on him by an unforgiving studio system, all paint a much fuller and far more somber portrait of the man. He wasn't just a clown. He was a deeply sensitive and insecure person who suffered in silence while the world applauded. The late-life reflections from his brother Mo are a haunting testament to the human cost of fame. They reveal a family's private agony and a brother's lifelong regret. The story isn't good because it reveals that one of our most beloved comedic icons was a victim of his own fragile health, of an exploitative system, and of a time that failed to care for him. In the end, knowing the full story doesn't bring comfort. It brings a heartbreaking clarity. It forces us to acknowledge the pain behind the pratfalls and the tears behind the nyuk-nyuk-nyuks. And perhaps, in understanding his full story, we can appreciate his gift even more. We can celebrate the incredible laughter he gave the world, while also remembering Jerome Horwitz, the gentle, troubled man who paid an impossibly high price for our amusement. Curly's story is one of laughter and heartbreak. His ability to create joy is immortal, but the man behind the Stooge deserves to be remembered for his full, complex, and ultimately tragic story. Share this video to keep the memory of the man, not just the comedian, alive. Let us know your favorite Curly moment in the comments below, and let's continue to celebrate the brilliant, irreplaceable Jerome Curly Howard.